factor. Harambee in Swahili means the spirit of cooperation, pulling together. And I think this is what I was trying to show, that the India-Africa partnership is different from others. It is the more level, egalitarian partnership without being a donor-donee relationship. Now, when I set out to write this book, at that time there was no pandemic. So there were certain significant things which were evident about Africa, which we needed to factor in if we were to assess where to go after 20 years of partnership. First, as Arvind mentioned, there are 54 countries in Africa who are members of the United Nations. There are 55 members of the AU, but one, the Harambee Arab Democratic Republic, is not a UN member and we don't recognize it. 54 countries is a lot of votes in the United Nations. So as a bloc, a lot of people other than India, a lot of partners tend to woo Africa for the sheer numbers of votes it carries. I don't think these votes move in a wave or in unison. They are fairly disharmonious. So they can be cracked, they can be unified, and I think that is something that we have come to learn. And this is because the period of non-alignment, the period of TCDC, anti-colonialism, all that is over. We are in a post-Cold War transactional phase where you are as good as the fulfillment of your last promise. That is what really matters now. It is important to note that in Africa, the median age is 19. And India is a young country. Median age is 27, but Africa is 19. That is an extremely youthful population. Before the pandemic, growth in Africa was now largely due to investment, consumption, and exports. FDI into Africa in 2019 was 11% higher than 2018. And in Asia, it was 4.6% higher. 6 out of 10 of the fastest growing economies in 2019 were in Africa. Between 2000 and 2016, Africa tripled its global trade from $276 to $806 billion. The new thing was that traditional partners became of lesser importance. Countries like India and China were always in the top 3. India, China, France. China the biggest, France and India alternating second and third positions. It is also interesting to note in Africa that there are 4 very large countries who have populations of more than 75 million. But there are 6 countries whose population is less than 1 million. So there is a lot of diversity. By 2050, 75% of the globe's increase in working age people will be in Africa. In 2015, when the last India-Africa Forum Summit was held, there were 6 African cities with populations of over 5 million. By 2030, there will be 20 such cities. 90 cities by then in Africa would have populations of more than 1 million. 25% of African people live within 100 kilometers of the coast. And yet there are, I think, more than 20 landlocked countries. $12 million graduates annually graduate in Africa. 200 million jobs would be required in the next decade. However, during the pandemic, 22 million jobs were lost. SDGs received a setback. Most significantly, the number of children who went back to labor increased substantially. 700 African companies have an annual turnover of about $1.5 trillion in 2016. 300 of these had turnovers of between $500 million and $1 billion individually, 300 companies. However, 50% of these were in South Africa, 25% in the North African countries, and only 25% in Sub-Saharan Africa, where much of the interaction now we focus upon. On the Indian side, we adopted a modern cooperative model, which of course was responsive, consultative, but very largely it was people to people oriented. It was private sector led. It had civil society components. Just think of the Indian diaspora and you will realize that all of them were in the private sector who started the trade and investment. Their civil society models are what went into building education, hospitals, and other social activity in many African countries. And they were largely people-to-people contact because in the early phases, these were not government-led. Later, India as a government joined these in many ways, but also set up its own implementation plans, which focused on human resource development and capacity building. The ITEC program, the special programs under the India-Africa Forum Summit, the large number of institutions that we set up, the Pan-African e-network project. These were very large grant projects which are deeply studied in the book because till date, there had been no impact assessment of India's assistance to Africa and the building up of this partnership. Now, I can't say that what I did is a true impact assessment. What I did was at least give you a real picture of what happened to every project which was envisaged. Did it get implemented or not? If not, why I thought were the reasons, and where some of them succeeded, I think we have statistics like the IT centers in Morocco and Egypt, I think are pretty successful, and I've given figures of how many students they have, how many courses they conduct. The big IT center in Ghana, which actually predates the African Union. It's from my first time as JS, 2002. That has done rather well. The Entrepreneurship Development and Training Center in Senegal has done almost 6,000 students from 8 to 10 French-speaking African countries. And a friend of ours and Professor Modi's, who was in Senegal last week, told me they still have 300 students right now. So there are success stories, but we have never assessed their impact. So I think this some idea of what we were doing has been brought out in this book. So basically, there is a 70-70-12 formula. India-Africa trade about $70 billion. Indian investment in Africa about $70 billion. And Indian lines of credit to Africa about $12 billion in operation. So this gives you an economic matrix of about $150 billion, which is not big, but it's not small either. And I tell you, it is bigger than many countries who we think are doing a lot in Africa. Now, this model that we had worked on a three-tier basis. So we evolved through the India-Africa Forum Summit, a traditional bilateral model, which came under the rubric of the IAFS now. Then we had engagements with the regional economic communities. We had it with some of them. We took it to all. And finally, there was the Pan-African level. So this three-tier model was best implemented by India in response to the African Union's Banjul formula. This formula was followed for the first two summits when we invited 15 select countries. But in the third summit, we invited all the African countries because there was rising demand by many that they wanted to be included. So this process of till about 2018-19 sees deep Indian penetration into countries where traditionally Indians had not gone. Central African Republic, maybe Mali, somewhat. But there were many places. 41 countries had Indian lines of credit. The ITEC program was everywhere. The special programs under the IAF was offered to all countries and all regional communities. So I think this geographical spread was quite complete. Now, what happens with the pandemic is that debt stress turns up. So the LOC model is neither cheap nor valuable anymore, but it has done you well from 2003 to 2019. And the three-tier cooperation leads to jerks because certain levels, particularly at the level of the AU and the regional communities, don't always work. But frankly, neither do all the countries bilaterally work. I mentioned the ETDC. It works very well in Senegal. It doesn't work at all in two other countries. So it is the nature of the host country and how much ownership they show towards the projects that ultimately makes the difference, and the ability of our embassies to bring that ownership and partnership to the fore, which makes projects succeed. Now, I did a survey among African interlocutors to find out whether we were doing well. And about 80% plus said that we had a good development model. But when we looked at the Indian businessmen engaged in Africa, 26% of them felt that the Indian model now needs a total revamp. 60% of them knew about trilateral efforts, and this is where the expansion could come because everything need not be done by India alone. 50% of the Indian respondents thought that FDI was the way to go. Interestingly, 70% of the African respondents also thought Indian FDI was the most valuable part of the partnership, not the concessional finance. So this FDI seems to be a part of the next phase that we need to look at. Among the 60% of people who said that, actually 87% of Indian respondents said we will invest in Africa. 60% chose Eastern Africa as the target, with Kenya and Ethiopia leading. West Africa and South Africa were the next, Southern Africa were the next targets. But the Indian private sector believes that they need more governmental support towards FDI. Now, this is where I let you know that while promoting trade, promoting lines of credit, and getting imports through the DFTP scheme have been part of government policy, promoting overseas investment has never been a part of conscious Indian policy. But whenever you spoke to African leaders, including at the India-Africa summits, they always mentioned this as a very important area for them. So somewhere now we need to bring in FDI as part of our policy. Now, how can this be done? I believe the best way to do this is to have an India development initiative where instead of pushing LOCs all the time or pushing grants into something which don't happen, we should have a certain amount of grant funds, which should look at consulting funds, support to bank guarantees or provide lines, concessional lines to banks and the like. Now, these can be rotational funds. The company should be able to borrow and use the fund to do a bankable project, and when the project gets done, return the money. This is essentially to overcome the gap that Africa has large demand for projects, but not enough bankable projects. That means there are not enough studies done for the project. The second part is that Indian banks are in retreat from Africa at a time when Indian FDI wants to advance. So we need to put out a lifeline of financing to Indian banks and possibly their counterpart African banks, because many Indian businessmen say the cost of doing business in Africa at local level is very high. So if we can use Indian funds to reduce the cost of funding and the cost of guarantees, you will be able to get support to FDI. Now, to conclude, why is FDI so important? Because, as I said, the Indian model is private sector led. But as early as 2006, Harry Broadman, writing for the World Bank on the new Silk Route, actually said that of all the partners of Africa, Indian investors were the best regarded because they were largely SMEs. They transferred the most technology, created the most local jobs, and contributed the most to local and regional trade. Now, if you look at the Africa Continental FTA, its whole aim is to create regional markets. And that is where Indian investment comes in. And in the survey, it showed that most Africans expect the Continental FTA to lead to Indian FDI and more regional supply chains. So I think that is the new matrix that we are looking at. And I think I want to stop here so that we have other parts of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gurjit, for those initial remarks, and a very important point about the need for stepping up support for FDI, Indian FDI in Africa, and also taking advantage of the continental FTA. So now I request Dr. Renu Modi to make her remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Arvind. Very good afternoon, Dr. Arvind, Director of the Vivekanand International Foundation, Ambassador Gurjit Singh, and Dr. Samuel Gatechu, and of course, my dear participants. It is a great privilege to be able to offer my thoughts on this magnum opus that Ambassador Gurjit has written. It's a really well-received work and trending all over the Africanist circle, the Harambee Factor, India-Africa Economic and Development Partnership. I would like to state that the book is really meticulously researched, wherein he combines his academic prowess with his experience of a diplomat who has served in various key postings in Kenya as ambassador of Ethiopia and the Africa Union, in India at the Videsh Mantralaya at the Africa desk, and as a Sherpa of the India-Africa Forum Summit. On a personal level, Gurjit has been a friend of the department ever since I joined the department. Earlier, my senior colleagues used to know him, and the best thing which I would like to put on record was, despite his busy schedule, he was always available to us at the center. He came and supported many of our activities. He wrote book chapters for us, and even now when we have events, we write to the Africa desk in the Ministry of External Affairs, and we share some of our papers which we think are valuable, but very rarely do we get a response. Most of them tell us that they are busy, but Gurjit never did that. And Gurjit, thank you so much for that. And this is a culmination of your years of hard work. So congratulations again, Gurjit. Now let me come, Gurjit has already spelled out the statistics and the importance of Africa and India-Africa engagement. So I'd like to sidestep that and move to some reflections of my own. I feel the book is extremely objective, analytical, and self-reflective of India's engagement in Africa. And in doing so, it does a great service to the policymakers, to academia, to business. It's a ready handbook for ready reference for academia and everybody else. I don't think there will be another book like this in the near future. When I'm talking of self-reflection, when I'm talking of the self-reflective part of the book, I would like to share an anecdote of President Museveni of Uganda. He was receiving an award for the work done by Uganda in countering HIV epidemic. So he said, in the African villages, once a lion comes to attack the village, you have to make a loud alarm and make a lot of noise so that the whole village comes together to attack the lion. And otherwise, the lion will eat us up. This is what we did with AIDS. And that is what Ambassador Gurjit has done with his book. He has dealt with the problems head on. instead of being in a denial mode of sweeping aside some of the problems under the carpet, which is what I feel adds value. It's a very honest and a very objective and a critical work, which you rarely find from the diplomatic circle, at least. So this book is extremely valuable to all of us. And the book rightly evaluates threadbare what was right, what went wrong with our development projects, as Ambassador has just mentioned, and how can we better this journey. So as Ambassador himself said, that this is not a historical account of India-Africa engagement. While briefly mentioning that, he recommends a way forward for India-Africa engagements. I would like to say that the book is steeped in Afro-realism, or the realism of Africa today. Like other countries, India too has moved into the phases of Africa rising narrative in the post-2000. Then we moved on to Afro-euphoria, which was a narrative created in 2000 by financiers, bankers, and the investors, and then by reports such as Lions on the Move by McKinsey, published in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. Following that was a period of Afro-pessimism, and currently we are in the phase of Afro-realism, which is what the book reflects. While acknowledging the historical and cultural connections, I feel that India-Africa relations can no longer be framed in the historical backdrop of the monsoon-born transoceanic connections of the Indian Ocean since the first century, the solidarity against colonialism and apartheid, and India's support in the decolonization phase. I'll cite you. So today, the new narrative needs to be realigned to the global realities and Africa's position in the World Committee of Nations, which is what Ambassador Gurjit's book has done. He has already mentioned a lot about Africa, but briefly, I'd like to say that Africa is a powerhouse with 54 countries, votes. It's endowed with natural resources, hydrocarbons, metals, minerals, land, water, a demographic, and a rising middle class, which is only about 18 million, but it's rising. Consumer spending capacity, relatively fewer conflicts, macroeconomic stability, and a poster cases such as Rwanda, Ethiopia was a poster case, but with the conflict, I don't know if we can call that. So in this backdrop, India has offered an alternative modality for investment, transfer of technology, easy loans, and we source our energy and food security from from the continent. And the India-Africa Forum Summit, of which Gurjit was a Sherpa of one of these, it has set high benchmarks and announced LOCs of 10 billion, grants of 600 billion, the India Development Fund of 100 billion, and the Health Fund, amongst other. Capacity building has been the bedrock of India-Africa relations. As Ambassador points out, that the Harare Military Academy in 1958 was the first institution set up to train Ethiopian military personnel. When in general academic discourse, we start our capacity building initiative story from the ITEC, which was a bilateral assistance program launched in 1964. So as Ambassador has already said, the perception studies say that Africans highly value our capacity building initiatives, training capacities, scholarships, LOCs, and FDIs. But over the years, what we have realized is that, or it's proven that high GDP is not the indicator of people's well-being. What needs to one needs to read into is the human development indices, which are aligned to the sustainable development goals. The 3 India-Africa Forum summits have attempted to further objectives beyond the strategic and the economic concerns. So I'm just referring to 2 points because we don't have that much time. Ambassador Gurjit's book talks about a paper titled We the People, Chapter 6, where it's talking about people-to-people connection. Herein he refers some important CSOs like the Barefoot College at Telonia, SEVA, and the AIMA, All India Management Association, among others. So the Sola Mamas were trained in Barefoot College in Telonia, which I had the opportunity to visit at one of the training programs. They went back home and they lit up their villages, and they trained the other women and became master trainers. Now 5 regional centers have been set up, partly with the MEA funding, and partly they have been encouraged to look funding from their local sources, UN sources, or any other country. Gurjit is one thing I like about this work is that throughout this entire book, Gurjit's work does not dwell on the nostalgia of our centuries-old relation. It's very business-like, and it means like, what can we do ahead and how can we do it better? And one of the key factors, 2 key factors which he mentions throughout, is avenues for funding innovative funding mechanisms and sustainability of projects. So that's where I'm coming to. He's talking about the Telonia model, where he's encouraging the Barefoot College International to source funding from the private sector to sidestep the bureaucracy and the delays that happen when we work with government because of the way multi-layered processes involved. Then the book mentions in the chapter, We the People, the role that SEWA has played in gender equity, women's empowerment, cooperatives, microfinance. I'll give you one example from Ghana, where the work of SEWA led the Shea Butter Nut Cooperative Collective to increase their prices manifold, because shea butter is a very important product used for cosmetics internationally. So because trained by SEWA, they could work collectively. They hiked up their prices on a collective basis, which worked well for them. So SEWA has been, and therefore with this work of the Barefoot College and the SEWA, we are also in a way internationalizing and feminizing our foreign policy. So that is a major contribution of the India-Africa Forum Summits. I would like to say that when I look at the MEA outcome budgets, I feel that the sum allotted to these CSOs is really, really small. Though we talk about them at every India-Africa Forum Summit, every Minister Summit, but the traction that these CSO activities, the goodwill and the soft power they have generated for us, for India's development cooperation, far outweighs the money that the ministry has spent on them. The IMA he mentions is that he trains 1,350 people. Ambassador has also mentioned about the role played by the diasporic organizations, the Hindu councils, the Jain councils, the Gurudwaras, the Shia and Bohra and the Islamic philanthropic organizations that are doing charitable works on the continent. And I would like to mention two critical perspectives that the ambassadors has offered in the book. One, I would like to talk about the major development initiative, the Pan-Africa E-Network, of which Ambassador was a part right from its formulation to the implementation. I know that he was the initiator and implementer of the pilot project in the Black Lion Hospital. The Pan-Africa project was set up at the intersection of the health and the digital strength of India, launched by President Abdul Kalam's idea. It was a much lauded international project at a cost of a whopping almost 600 crores to offer telemedicine and teleeducation through satellite connectivity. MEA was a nodal agency and TCIL the implementer on a turnkey basis. Now, Ambassador writes that this project did well in the first phase, but it slowly withered away. And he gives an example and why it did not do so well. So in 2019, the eVAB and the e-Arogya Bharti and e-Vidya Bharti have been renewed, but with a greater emphasis on the education component. Now, this is what happens when we look at our projects in a reflective manner. So we can continue with the projects that have done well. We can scale down the projects which have not done well, because after all, it's public money and it should be used well. So Ambassador queries that would it have been viable to work bilaterally with countries for the PAN? Because maybe through AU, which represented 54 diverse countries, then maybe that was one of the reasons of the delays in the implementation. He dwells on the issues that plague the project, more so the telemedicine component. His chapters talk about the bureaucracy, the slow pace of the bureaucracy. He mentions stealing of the wires which were set up between Djibouti and Addis. He talks about the lack of ownership of the project of the African partners and the slow responses of the doctors in Africa. It also raises a questions that how does one plan for the afterlives of such expensive projects which are made at public expenses, at the taxpayers' money, your money, my money. And of course, there has to be an impact assessment. I have never understood why the government of India shies away or does not like this conversation on impact assessment. Impact assessment only enables greater accountability, I feel, transparency, and makes the people who are implementing more accountable and lets us know whether the project received the objectivity or the objective that it was set out to. So, so then how do you make these projects sustainable once the grants have not stopped? So that is a challenge which India will have to look into for further projects, because there were little commercial spin-offs for the stakeholders, that is the participating universities, the hospitals, the TCI due to these projects. So what are the new safeguards that we need to integrate into future projects such as these? So that was one aspect. The second and the last critical perspective I would like to deal with is on the lines of is the lines of credit. It's one of the preferred modalities with the limited challenges. Ambassador mentions that HIPC have been the greatest beneficiaries. 30 out of the 30 beneficiaries have taken this LOCs. It has a grant element about 56%. 80% of India's LOCs go to India. But he candidly refers about their poor implementation, not all the time, at times, of course, project delays, lack of transparency, and how these were overcome by the revised guidelines of 2015, which led to the streamline of the bidding process, pre-qualifications of companies, which led to greater improvement in the process. But the paperwork and the approvals, Ambassador writes, takes about 2 years. And hence, there's a need urgently to look for innovative funding mechanisms. So he brings in the role of the buyer's credit, the role of the Indian bank. He supports trilateral cooperation. One of the examples mentioned in the book is of the CETA, which is Aid for Trade project, with the UNDP and the DFID collaboration, where 5 countries in East Africa went into agro-processing with the help of Indian companies and augmented their export capacity. So one thing is clear from the book, that aid the way of the traditional donors is definitely out of the scenario. It will not work in the future. Another point that I would refer to is the South-South cooperation based on consultation, demand-driven, no conditionality, etc. Africans at various seminars and conferences ask us when we go to present that there is a gap between the enunciation of South-South cooperation and its praxis. They say that the engagement between countries of the global South and Africa are not truly unconditional because of the export project credit that you have to buy projects from India. So now it is even more difficult to discern the agendas of the traditional donors and the emerging economies because the DAC donors have kind of swallowed up the vocabulary of the South-South cooperation of the global South. So now you cannot differentiate between the win-win, mutual benefit. Everybody is talking about this. So I feel personally that the bottom line is real politics and the national self-interest, which all the countries are pursuing through their soft power and smart power in Africa. So the key takeaways of this book is moving away from aid to self-financing models, from an Afro-realism. In that, Ambassador mentions a very interesting case study of President Nelson Mandela. During his premiership of South Africa, he exhibited pro-Western orientation and criticized India's testing of the nuclear our facilities, as well as his offer to mediate in the Jammu and Kashmir issue, which was obviously not approved by India. So these are wake-up calls for India that historical connections between India and Africa are truly a thing of the past. Our future pathways will be calibrated on criteria aligned to the realities of today, which the book outlines in every single page. The Africa Union President, Alpha Konare, mentioned that the terms and conditions should be set by Africa for strategic and meaningful partnership. So now, for example, when we read paper and when we read newspapers and all, we find that there have been protests and contestations against global companies, including Indian companies, such as those in the extractive segment, on grounds of dispossession of land rights of the indigenous peoples, on issues of non-payment of royalty to the counties, etc. So this is clearly displaying greater agency of the African powers, of the African countries. On the last point, I want to say that the Serum Institute at the Davos World Economic Forum recently, just this week, announced that they would set up manufacturing facilities to produce vaccines in Africa. I feel that the coming years will see greater footprints of India's SME sector in basically the social sectors, health, agro-processing, digital, amongst others. So one thing I really like and would like to note in this book is that while Ambassador acknowledges the role of the private sector, he cautions that future investments will gain traction only if they are sustainable, generate jobs and transfer technology and build capacities. I wish to add to that only companies with go green and which comply with the environmental social governance standards, which are not even spoken of by the Indian companies in Africa, and work on the agendas that further the SDGs and Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, will survive and will be appreciated. But then you have a question of how do you make profits? Can companies in the extractive sector be clean and profitable at the same time? So there are many questions that this book raises. I wish to conclude by reiterating that the Harambee factor between India and Africa will continue, but within newly calibrated strategies aligned to the interest of Africa and its peoples. India will use innovative funding mechanisms for its development cooperation initiatives because, as Ambassador uses too many interesting proverbs at the beginning of his titles, because money is indeed sharper than a sword, and because India will set sail using its own star, and which has been doing since the past decade. So two of the proverbs that Ambassador has used, that India should set sail using its own star and that money is indeed sharper than the sword, in a way summarize India's Africa policy in the years ahead. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Dr. Arvind.
Thank you, Dr. Modi, for those remarks and for bringing out some very substantive elements of the book, focusing on what could be the new model for India-Africa relations and why it should be. It requires a change. So that's very perceptive comments you made. And I think the book would be very useful for the policymakers who are recalibrating their strategies in all areas, including Africa. So now I request Mr. Samir Bhattacharya, Research Associate at the VIF, to make his remarks.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to be here, and to the ambassador, I would like to congratulate him on writing a reflection of his story, his life story, working in this continent, which has become fascinating even for us. I grew up being fascinated by the cultures of India. I grew up watching Mother India to begin with. I remember even watching it last year with my cousins who were visiting us from Canada and from the US, trying to remember how much India has really enriched us culturally. Some of our movies that are being made in Ethiopia currently have taken a glimpse of Bollywood, which I had a chance to visit when I visited India a few years ago, 3 years ago, when your former ambassador, who is now, I understand, is a spokesperson of the foreign ministry, invited me, and we had a chance to visit many places, including historical sites. I grew up in Ethiopia. When we needed to go see a doctor, most of us went to Kenya looking for the Aga Khan hospitals because we believed in Indian medical doctors. You can hardly find anyone who hasn't really benefited from the teachers, the Indian teachers that taught us basic English when we started as a young person like myself. When we started, I was living in Lusaka, Zambia then. And that's the brand of India within this African continent. And Ethiopia is no different. Your previous speaker spoke about, she gave an example of Ethiopia being an example, but she also reflected of the challenges of what Ethiopia is going through at the moment. Let me give you a glimpse of what's happening in Ethiopia. For the last 2 years, Ethiopia has been in conflicts. It's not just in Tigray, as most of outsiders are assuming. It's also in Amhara and in Afar and in many parts of the nation. When I moved back to Ethiopia from Canada, I wanted to have reflect on the reality on what was taking place in this country, which I left as a youngster. I wanted people to have an understanding far beyond the story of perhaps Haile Selassie that connected Ethiopia to perhaps to Jamaica and so on. Many people have had a love affair with Ethiopia because of perhaps the coffee. Ethiopia coffee was founded in Ethiopia a long time ago in a town called Kaffa, which the name coffee has taken its name from. But I wanted to give them a glimpse. Ethiopia had so much hope in 2016. The prime minister, who has really been compared to perhaps your controversial, beloved leader of the past, Gandhi, had really wanted to bring peace to this country because he had influence from people like Gandhi to understand that you have to solve, long-term problems within this country of perhaps more than 115 million people by peaceful engagement, negotiations, compromise. But that's not what's been happening in Ethiopia for the last 2 years, which has really damaged much of the international investments that have come to this country, including from India. The head of the cement factory in Ethiopia, owned by a Nigerian billionaire, its CEO was killed 3 years ago, and we don't even know how he was killed. I have been trying to find out information how he has been killed. As a journalist, I believed Ethiopians needed to know, and as his Indian families were entitled to know how he was killed. But we haven't been able to search and give the public the kind of response that they need. But Indians haven't run away from this continent. Indians are closer to Africa more than ever before. There are thousands of teachers that have flown to this part of Africa, not just in Ethiopia, but even in Kenya and other countries, trying to teach Africans basic education. The Indian government giving even my cousins basic scholarships to come to India and study in a place called Pune, which has given so many people hope, including my cousins who have been given the education that they need to really move forward and escape the kind of poverty that awaited them should they if they did not get that kind of education. So Africa owes India a lot. And that's why I think India is best in solving the conflict that has really devastated Ethiopia for the last 2 years. As a journalist in Ethiopia, I've been able to travel in so many places, and the people that are being displaced, so the people that have been dying is just overwhelming, even for us to reflect on, to report on it. And that's why Indian foreign leadership is needed more than ever. But I just came from a town called Amhara. So to give you a glimpse of the challenge of foreign investment to this country, there has been a Turkish company that have been stationed in a place called Kombolcha. They've invested hundreds of millions of dollars to try to connect Ethiopia to as far away as Tanzania, so trade could flow from Ethiopia to all the way to Tanzania. And they were at 94% of the project from being completed. At the moment, the whole project has collapsed. Everything that they've built has been destroyed. Much of their equipments have been stolen, and they can't even finish the project because it has totally been destroyed. So that's the kind of challenge I think foreign investors are having in this continent, and Indians are no exception. I'll just take questions. Yes.
Thank you, Samoy, for those remarks, and I understand the pain and anguish that you have about the current situation in Ethiopia, and you have been very kind to India and the contribution of Indians. Thank you very much. And I think that's what probably one important factor while it is important to be realistic, but there is this emotional side to the relationship, historical side to the relationship, the culture, which cannot really be captured in some transactional relationships. So while we move to a new paradigm of India-Africa relations, but I think the past of India-Africa relationship will always be remembered. It is good and bright, and on that also provides a foundation for our relationship. So thank you very much for your remarks. Now I turn to Mr. Samir Bhattacharya, Research Associate of VIF, for his remarks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ambassador Gurjit Singh, sir. It was wonderful reading your book, and it's really an honor to be able to speak on your book. So I have read your book very carefully, probably more than 2-3 times, and I would share. Already you have given a lot the best parts of the book, and Renu ma'am also told about the book. But still, I will share my experience of the book and some parts which I found very interesting, and probably some additional elements that I would have wanted. So to start with, I would join our director, sir, to congratulate you on this book, writing this book, because if on this subject, there is hardly any literature that deals specifically to the India-Africa Development Partnership. In the course of the years, there have been several changes in the political leadership in this last 2 decades, as you said. There were so many changes in the political leadership in both India and Africa, particularly in Africa, where the change of government is often by force. However, the partnership remained constant, and in your own words, bringing African participation to a larger member of international fora and participating with them in the new emerging order was a steady Indian policy. So yeah, definitely there have been a lot of ups and downs in this relationship. As Renu ma'am said, that this book reflects Afro-realism. I'll give to the audience a few examples that the author quoted in this book. He quoted, during the Sino-Indian conflict of 1962, only 2 African countries, Ethiopia and Nigeria, supported India. Later in 1996, when there was a question of Indian membership to the UNSC, African bloc preferred Japan to India. And then the heaviest jolt India received in 2000, when Nelson Mandela, the first elected president of South Africa, not only criticized India nuclear issue, but also expressed his concern over Kashmir and offered to mediate. But nevertheless, the spirit of partnership never lost its spark, and today India and Africa have a vibrant partnership animated by the spirit of developing together as equals, focusing on capacity building, development cooperation, and economic and technological initiatives. And in this spirit of cooperation, you have written this book. So you have already explained why the name of the book, the word, it's a very interesting story. The book has 12 chapters that unearths every aspect of India's development partnership with Africa, the challenges and the possibilities. As a student, I am a student of Africa Studies, and most of the time I have faced hurdles to access different areas of cooperation, as there is a real paucity of scholarship. And in this book, the way you have detailed all the formal and informal institutions of cooperation, I find it a very important resource as a African scholar. You have distinguished Indian development partnership from traditional partners as focused on micro sustainability of projects rather than on macro sustainability. You have given some quickie examples of comparison between India and China in project delivery. I'll quote one. You said that when China promises to finish their project in 3 years, they generally take 6. And when India promises 4 years, it never really finishes. I mean, this creates a very not a very good image for India in African continent. However, you have also cited some examples of project where the project got delivered even before the due deadline, such as one water project in Tanzania. Now, next very crucial information insight you shared in this book is the politicization of project location by the African Union. It's a really a big hindrance the way you explained it. It's the example that you have given. It's one was that India wanted to invest in a civil aviation academy and asked African Union for a location, and based on their quota of allocation, African Union suggested Chad. So the project never really took off. And this process of LOC, there is a whole chapter dedicated on it. Renu ma'am also spoke in detail of LOCs. I'll not go to that detail, but yes, as you said, the process of LOCs have also become really cumbersome, and the way they have to fill the forms, etc. Some of them are already saying, well, we used to prefer this over IMF and World Bank because it was simple. If it's that complex, then why should we go it? Then, so this is how it's also losing its competitive edge. And concerning the effectiveness of these LOCs, as per the 2015 guidelines, all projects over 50 million USD requires an independent evaluation. However, no such evaluation has been undertaken so far. In this context, you have suggested unilateral grant enhancement as a way forward. You also advocated for life cycle cost rather than straightforward lending and repayment, and some other suggestions that should be carefully evaluated. Then in trade, you have said, you have explained, given all the statistics data, the DTFP scheme announced by India is currently available by 38 African nations. Today, India is Africa's 4th largest trading partner and 5th largest investment partner. But surprisingly, when Africa is in dire need of different financial products, you said that banks are facing decrease in business opportunities and they are not interested in continuing their business. So certainly I feel that there is a need, there is a gap in understanding the local needs by these banks. Maybe you could explain from your experience what is happening in this financial sector. Then there is also, in one part you have mentioned that India is the only Asian country to be the member of African Capacity Building Foundation, ACBF, and India contributed 1 million for its skill development and poverty alleviation programs. So maybe this here also, given India is doing so much with LOCs and bilateral basis, I really did not understand the thinking behind Indian government in contributing to ACBF. Probably here also you can, if you can explain it a little, it will be great. I will quote some parts of the chapter 2 of this book, where you detail a separate section on the changes of India's Africa policy under Modi government. You have detailed the changes took place in the Ministry of External Affairs and how it contributed in more attention towards Africa. This chapter, I mean, the way you detailed every information and you took a careful note, meticulously pointed in this book, it's excellent. I have never seen this in any other book. In you started from 2002 when African Union was launched. So in 2002 there was a major umbrella of African division under which all sub-Saharan Africa was divided into two, with one looking after East and Southern Africa and other was Central and Western Africa. But in this new administrative of Modi government in 2015, the Africa portfolio was transferred to the Secretary West, from the Secretary West to the Secretary Economic Relation. And as the same department was in charge of Development Partnership Administration, so it smoothened the functioning of the Africa related work. You explained it so well, how this simple change of direction can ease lot of things. In January 2020, there was further change in additional secretary level when there was one additional secretary appointed specifically for Africa. And similarly, another additional secretary appointed in 2012 to oversee the Development Partnership division under the Secretary ER. So these were like real change in the government. You also explained how the appointment of Dr. Jaishankar as Foreign Secretary in January 2015 led to improvement and meaningful action with regard to Africa. You explained each and like the 10 guiding principles, we read it everywhere, but you really detailed all the principles all the principles during the pandemic. Despite the domestic needs, India sent medicines to over 40 African countries, showing the importance of Africa in India's foreign policy. This happened recently again when in the aftermath of Ukraine crisis. Despite domestic needs, India decided to lift the export ban on wheat for Africa and treat it case by case basis. So in a way, India has even if all these real shocks and etc., India has always remained positive. You being a diplomat yourself, you could easily spell out these many internal challenges that Indian foreign ministry is facing. One interesting example that was given in the book, when South Africa approached India to support its membership in 2009, for that time it was BRIC. So, but for some reason, India took the position that it required a consensus and did almost nothing to prepare such a consensus. And later on, China took the chance and China led the arrangement for South Africa to become a member. So India lost an opportunity to take the credit. So there are plenty of examples where the red tapeism and probably lethargy of indecisiveness of Indian ministry has led to our other countries getting the upper hand. It is true that given the scarcity of academic writing on this subject, collating of all these partnership angles up to the COVID pandemic, it's awesome. Till date, no worthwhile analysis has been made on the. However, when we go to, you have detailed all the LOCs, details of LOCs and ITech programs. When we go to the website, we find how much in the ministry website, how much is allocated for these LOCs, but we never see the implementation data, neither the impact. So probably this could be a subject for your next book, where you can actually go into detail of some of these LOCs and detail their impact in the ground. You have suggested some way forward based on your experience to enhance the effectiveness of these tools. However, notwithstanding this meticulous details of all these cooperations, this insights of this effectiveness will be a really added thing for the for the scholars, particularly for the academia and policy makers. Now the book is already 500 pages long, so with so many details, summing it up in 500 page was a real tough task, which you have done in a brilliant manner. I would have also wanted a few extra pages on, if possible, on India's maritime and energy sectors, and with some recommendation on your based on your own experience. And also some facts on the importance of China factor in shaping India's Africa policy. That could have been also an interesting addition. I have read and heard in other events where you have mentioned that this book was meant to be released before IAFS 4. So this unfortunate spin-off of the book is this timing of this publication. So the facts and evidence of the books are arranged in such a manner. This could have helped so much if IAFS 4 will take place tomorrow. But given the uncertainty of the current times, if this event takes place, say, I don't know when, if it really delays, then probably several priorities might change. So in that case, probably you will need to write another paper or another policy paper to reflect the changing realities whenever it takes place. Notwithstanding, this book would be extremely handy to carve out new policies and programs based on the past experience. To conclude, your efforts in collating and presenting this enormous amount of data in such structured manner is commendable, and the book fulfills the need for an updated compendium of all branches of India-Africa Development Partnership. There is a growing interest in studying India-Africa relations in India, as we have seen recently with Symbiosis School of International Studies is launching a new Master of Arts in African Studies. They will teach geoeconomics and foreign policy. So this school, and I am a student of JNU in Mumbai University, and in any other places where African studies is taught, this book could be really used as a textbook. It has a lots of value for students who want to learn about India-Africa relation. But not only that, this book can have a lot of value for the students who are interested in the role of emerging powers from the South, international development, foreign policy, South-South cooperation, and global political economy. So it was a great pleasure to read the book, and thank you for being here, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Samir, for those comments. And as one can see, there is desire and demand for more. Dil mange more, Gurjit. So you could perhaps take some of these issues that he has flagged, in the next book, because one would like to understand the security dimension of India-Africa relations, because it's a part of our Indo-Pacific narrative as well. Maritime security is very important, and with the island nations, we have some excellent contacts. And there's a lot of discussion that takes place, particularly in the VIF, about the security and strategic aspects. But there's not much information that is still available, and perhaps even understanding. So we have a few minutes more, and I'll like to open this for any comments and questions, and then I'll get back to Ambassador Gurjit Singh for his wrap-up comments. So would anybody like to ask any questions or make any comments?